Thank you, Professor Kleinhempel, for this fine, fantastic invitation, for the honor to speak to you today on behavioral approaches to compliance. And let me share my screen with you. I hope that works. Yeah, it does work. And this is, I hope you can see my slides.
I see it perfectly well, yes.
Okay, thank you. So let's give it a start. What I would like to tell you today is some of the limits and some of the problems that we have with compliance when we look at it from a behavioral perspective. And I will run through also 2 interactive games with you. So please be prepared to become active during this presentation. When we talk about corruption, the first thing that you certainly will think of when you are sort of looking at my own work, then you know it's the Corruption Perceptions Index, which we started with in 1995 and which has become a major toolkit for policy, but as well for companies, for addressing the problems with corruption and to make people aware of the problems with corruption. Now, my work has not only just been the measuring of corruption, but this was only the first step into a thinking of what are the major causes. What actually causes corruption? Is it a lack of control? Do we need clearer control systems that enable us to inhibit greed among influential people? Or are there deeper underlying cultural influences that are relevant, that come into play? And this has been one of the topics of research for the last 25 years, and certainly we have found out quite a lot. When we think of the standard approach to fight corruption, we would think of the idea that individuals are by nature selfish, that they might misuse their power. Oh, I'm lacking the word misuse in here. Individuals might misuse their power due to greed. And that greed is the essence, the core driver of corruption. And in order to contain this influence, we must have institutions, and they must be designed such that there is a risk of detection and punishment. So this is one aspect in the fight against corruption, that even if we have different wordings, we are talking about transparency or about public sector reform, very often this maintains this persists to be the core approach in our thinking, that the problem is with the individual, with the greed, and the building up of better institutions on top of the individual. If we put this into a table, we might think there is at first the cause, and the cause is selfishness and greed. And if we have a systemic approach to anti-corruption, we would need some objective data, some verifiable data to really find out who the culprits are. And then we must implement control mechanisms. For example, external control, but also internal control. So if you think of the 4 Eyes principle, for example, we would have this as a widespread principle across the globe, not only in companies, but also in governments, as a method of internal control. And the idea would be to have some incentives that would counterbalance the selfishness and the greed of the individual. And this incentive is a fear of punishment. And only with this fear of punishment, we would think we can induce people to become spirited in a corporate sense and spirited in a public sense. And when we implement measures, we would seek to limit the discretionary power by having now objective and verifiable data that take away the discretionary power from the individual who would be inclined to misuse, who would always be willing to bias decisions in their own favor, but with clear and verifiable data, we could sort of balance this out. And we have the idea that whenever we communicate to individuals, that there is a policy of zero tolerance. So zero tolerance would imply that whatever one does wrong is wrong. And there is no gray area in between. It's very clear that one can address corruption in this objective and clear manner. And the professions we want to become engaged in anti-corruption would be accountants and compliance officers and law enforcers, in fact. People who would then have the capacity to distinguish between right or wrong. Now, when I portray this as the standard approach, you will surely observe that I'm a little one-sided here. I might draw a picture that is a little oversimplified, and nonetheless, you would hopefully agree that this is mostly what we think of in the area of anti-corruption. Now I want to take you onto a journey where we have 4 examples where the standard approach has its limits, and where the standard approach should not be abolished. This is not what we want as behavioral scientists, but where we argue that it must be complemented. The first thing I would like to alert you to is a game. And in order to run the game, let me briefly copy this link to you. This link will be for a, now I must find, how can I, here in the chat area, I hope I can send the link to all of you. And the only thing you have to do is click on this link, and then you are already part of the game. So let me see how many of you are now logged in. Already 46. So while you're clicking on the link, let me explain the game. Are we back now here? No. This way, right. So the game is a dice game. I want you to roll the dice, and since you probably did not bring a die with you, you can do this online. And I will give you a link to an online dice generator in a moment. So your task will be, once you open the website on the online dice generator, to click on roll. And once you click on roll, you see the outcome of a dice roll. Then please go back to the other one, to the other website. This is the Class X website, which I'm showing to you right here. So once I start here, then you will have the opportunity to insert what you saw in the dice, on the dice website. So I hope, oh yeah, the game has not yet started. I'm still explaining the game. Once I'm done with the explanation, I will start the game. So yeah, and you're already asking for the dice link. Okay, since you're so urgent, but maybe let me explain the game first, and then I will send you the dice link, okay? So the task will be to click on roll, observe the number in the dice task, then flip over to the other website and insert the outcome. And now you will get paid. And you will get paid according to the table that you see here on the right-hand side. So when you insert the number 1, I will pay you €5. If you roll the 2, I will pay you €10. If you report the 3, you will get €15 for the 420, 525. When you observe a 6 and insert the 6 into the website, you get €30. What you should know is that you will get this money in reality, because one participant of you will be randomly chosen by the computer to obtain the designated payoff. This is done by the website by sending you a winning code. So one person will obtain the winning code, and once you have the winning code, please send it to me by email, and I will transfer the money via PayPal. So you really play it for real. We have done this many, many times. So don't worry, I'll be happy to receive the email by the winner. Okay? Are the instructions about clear? So let me maybe repeat. You will first open the online dice generator. So here I have it, but now I must press roll. I see roll, and yeah, the result is a 4. Then I go back to the other page, to the Class X page, which is an online tool for experiments. And there you will insert what you observed. See, there is one question. Could you please send your email? Right, my email address. I will send my email address at the end, and maybe we start now, and I give you now the online dice generator. So please open this website, click on roll, and then you have your outcome. And I now also press the start button, which allows you now to enter the number that you obtained. Okay, here we go. Now I will display the results, and at that time I will also pick the winner. The computer will pick the winner and disperse the payoff. So let's see what it looks like. Here we go. And the winner will just be informed and will have obtained the winning code. So congratulations on the win. Now, when you have a look at the experiment, at the incentives that you see in the experiment, what type of incentives did you observe here? Well, for sure, you all observed that there was a dilemma. You entered into a dilemma because you were supposed to insert the number that you saw, while at the same time you saw that you get more money if you report a high number. So I induced you to dishonesty. This is a game where dishonesty paid off. And now there are suddenly two forecasts of how you might have behaved. There is a standard economic forecast which would argue that people are purely selfish, and when they see an opportunity to make an extra profit, they will not care about honesty. If that perspective were right, you would all have chosen the 6. Like, was it Raul or Diego who was asking, can I roll until I get the 6? Well, in fact, you don't even have to roll until you get the 6. You can just invent the 6 by yourself. There is no chance for me to detect that. And if I pay you what you inserted, I cannot even infer whether you were honest or not. If the winner reports a 6, this could just be true. But it might also be due to cheating. So the person who plays the game enjoys a level of privacy. And this level of privacy thus invites for cheating. But what do we see? When you played the game, there was a slight overrepresentation of the 4 and probably only to a minor degree of the 5 and the 6. And the 3 was very rare. The 1 appears to be well represented. So what we observe, and this is commonly what we observe in this type of game, is an outstanding level of honesty. So let me tell you what we commonly find. Here, this is the finding from a lab experiment in 2011. And you see the 4 and the 5 were overrepresented, and the 6 also slightly. But many people also were willing to report a 1 or a 2. So there is a high intrinsic level of honesty. And this is surprising to economists, and it's surprising to all who believe that people are by nature selfish. So there is a tendency among people to preserve their self-image. And the interesting thing is we see a correlation of these findings with levels of corruption. Now, this is the result from a publication by Jonathan Schulz and Simon Gechter from 2016, where they found that in countries with low levels of corruption, so these would be countries here in the TI index with values of 90, like Germany, Great Britain, Sweden, Netherlands, Austria, people tend to report low values on average in these DICE experiments. Whereas in countries that are known to have higher levels of corruption, Tanzania, Morocco, Kenya, Guatemala, Vietnam, China, people tend to report higher values, so they cheat more. The consequence is maybe we can explain levels of corruption pretty well by an intrinsic tendency to behave honestly. So it's not so much control, but it's more these types of deep-rooted intrinsic tendencies. There's another piece of evidence, which is called the lost wallet experiment. What some colleagues of mine did was they were losing wallets around the globe. And in fact, many, many wallets. And what they did is, well, they did not lose them on the street, but rather they handed them over at a desk to employees at banks, cultural establishments, post offices, hotels, and public offices, and were measuring afterwards what these people would do with the lost wallets. And there was always money inside, and some personal belongings, and some email addresses, which apparently belonged to the owner. So they could measure how honest these people were. here, this is the result. The share of wallets that were reported was astonishingly high, although these people did have some extra work to report. And again, this correlates with the corruption perceptions index. So when you look here at the right-hand side on the top, we have New Zealand, Denmark, Sweden, Switzerland, Norway, countries with low levels of corruption, where about 80% of the wallets were reported. That is intrinsic honesty. People do not want to see themselves as a thief. Likewise, in countries with high levels of corruption, so a low score in the corruption perceptions index, such as Peru or Mexico, we would see that few lost wallets were reported. Now there is one finding important for Argentina. Argentina, this is where you are here. Perceived to be highly affected by corruption, for sure, with many problems related to corruption. However, ordinary citizens have a high level of intrinsic honesty because almost 50% of the lost wallets were reported. So you do find a remarkable level of intrinsic honesty in Argentina. Now I have another game for you. Please, again, log into the website, and this time I have a short dilemma for you. And the short dilemma, so here's once again the link. This time you cannot earn money, but I would just like to confront you with this type of a dilemma. And let me just open the dilemma here. The dilemma refers to development assistance. Now, only few of you will know about development assistance, but put yourself into the shoes of someone who is in this development sector. And now you organize the transport of aid products to the region Unity, which is in South Sudan in Africa, where local guerrilla groups seek independence from the central government of South Sudan. Given the experience of other donors, you estimate that truck drivers must pay 200 euros per transport to the guerrilla fighters. You consider postponing the transport in order to avoid the payment, but your organization requests a speedy cash outflow and the completion of the project. I want you to decide whether you continue with the business or whether you prefer postponing the transport. So please make up your mind, and now I start, and you insert your choice. Okay, thank you. And now I will display the results, and I'm looking forward to this. Okay. Now, what I did not tell you was that for some of you, the instructions differed a little as compared to those of the others. In particular, the two options were different. Option B was always to postpone the transport, but option A was a very strict one, a very hard one, because here I order our truck driver to deliver the products and our financial department to hand out 200 euros in cash to the driver. This is direct, and it makes you feel responsible for what you're doing. And when this was the case, only a third of you approved of this choice, whereas 2/3 preferred not to do this and rather to postpone. Now, the other half of you had a different condition. Here, option A was reading, I contract with a local transport company which will deliver the products and make up for the additional costs by charging my company 200 euros more per transport. What's the difference? From a moral perspective, this is completely the same thing. And in fact, it's hard to tell whether postponing the transport is the right choice or option A is the right choice. So this dilemma is not about telling you what is right or wrong, but the dilemma tells you one thing, and that is a minor change can have a huge impact. And here the change is that with option A, I contract with a local transport company, which means you are no longer directly responsible. You're delegating to someone else. And this local transport company delivers the products, and in the books, for your bookkeeping, they supply you only with a gross value of the service that they delivered. So they will add on the costs to the service, and they will give you a gross receipt for what they did. And this is something you can easily hand over to your financial department. And you can even claim to be ignorant about the fact that 200 euros had to be paid. Now, morally, there is no difference to this. However, you see that now half of you were happy with this option A, with this new option A. When I played this dilemma with experts in the area of development assistance, the outcome was even much stronger because they know how hard it is for them to justify 200 euros being paid to guerrilla fighters. And this, I played this in 2014 with experts at the International Anti-Corruption Academy in Vienna. So what we find is that people are reluctant to become directly involved in corruption, which is a good thing. However, they are willing to become engaged if what they do is rather indirect. And what we suddenly see is that corruption is not just caused by greed, but by institutions that facilitate what we call a diffusion of responsibility, because those who did this are no longer feeling responsible. So, having said this, let me come to a finish, because I think my time is over. I therefore would like to contrast the standard approach with the behavioral approach. And the behavioral approach is one of the major causes of corruption is not just selfishness and greed, but it's a diffusion of responsibility. And what we observe very often is not really objective and verifiable data, but very often that we have data that is based purely on experience and intuition. So if you think of the dice experiment, we can never tell if someone told the truth. When someone reports the 6, this can be true, but it might also be cheating. So we must think of experience, of come to a value judgment in finding out where we believe there is cheating and where not. When we talk about control, we quite often observe that control can backfire, because when people feel controlled, they are losing their intrinsic motivation. And the behavioral approach is not to permanently increase control, but to assign clear duties and have some faith in self-control. And once duties are clear, we know people have a tendency to respect duties, not all of them, And for sure, at some stage, we need some control, but we do have reason to believe in the power of clear duties. And the incentives that balance the greed and selfishness of people is not just the fear of punishment, but very often it's intrinsic, because people don't want to regard themselves as a thief. What are the measures that we then have? Well, it's not just like in law enforcement, focusing on objective and verifiable data. It's rather trusting in the judgment and expertise of people whom we think they show some stewardship and some sense of honesty. When we communicate, we don't want to communicate zero tolerance, because zero is an illusion. We want to find out who has a clear tone at the top. Which are the business leaders that we trust in our supply chain to be really committed to disallowing corruption? And this is not a wording that rests on zero tolerance, but as a clear commitment. And which are the professions that we want to involve in the fight against corruption? It's not just accountants and compliance officers. It's very often behavioral scientists, psychologists, economists. We want a whole bunch of people in a good compliance department, as well as in the public sector, to become involved in this area. So much from my side. Thank you for your attention.